I'd like to begin by introducing myself. My name is Matthew Hulowinski, and I'm a technical consultant here with Autodesk. And in this presentation today, we'll be looking at some of the new and improved 2D layout features in Formz 7, which allow you to quickly and easily generate a set of 2D layout documents from your 3D models. We'll begin with this existing 3D design concept that was created by Tony Wynn. This project, called the Single Surface House, consists of a single curving form that transitions from floor to ceiling while overlapping and converging between the different elevations. This 3D model should make a great example for highlighting the powerful 2D layout features in Formz. Now, it should be mentioned that your 2D layout can be linked to your 3D model, so any changes to your model are automatically updated in your layout. And your associative dimensions automatically update as your design changes. Formz can also automatically generate hatch patterns when you create floor plans and cross sections, saving you valuable time. Layout lets you fully annotate your design with line styles, line weights, images, graphics, and anything else you need for a complete set of 2D layout documents. So with that, let's launch Formz and see for yourself how easy it is to create your own 2D layout in Formz. So we will switch over to Formz, and here is Tony's project, all modeled and rendered inside of Formz. Now, our case here is to show how easy it is to take this 3D model and convert it into a set of 2D layout documents. And here's how the process works. Simply go to the File pull-down menu and choose the New Layout Project option. And first thing you're going to do is select the size of paper that you want. So all sorts of industry standard paper sizes you can choose from. Let's choose Architectural E size. And of course you can do metric or English systems. Click the OK button, and that starts a brand new project. And here we have our layout space. This is a 2D world. And so here's our sheet of paper. And if we were to measure that sheet of paper using the measure tool, we'll see that since we chose the Architectural E size, it's 48 inches by 36 inches. And there's our sheet of paper that we're going to begin to lay things out on. Now, when we save this, you can see that if I were to save the project right now, this is a separate file which is saved as a .fml file. And I can give it a name, such as, how about Single Surface House Layout. So this will be saved as a separate project file. All right, now how do we get content in here? Well, there's all sorts of drawing tools to add lines, splines, arcs. You can add text and dimensions and all that stuff. Or you can use the content tools, which allows us to add content from 3D models into our layout space. Let's try the frame tool. With that, we simply select the frame tool and create a frame boundary. And inside that frame boundary, we're going to link that or sync it to a 3D model. And then we can see views of a 3D model inside of that frame. So let's load a 3D model. Let's take Tony's model here. Here's the FMZ file for that right there. Click open. And there it is. Now, what do we want to see in that frame? Well, we can change the view. We can use one of the views that are already saved in that 3D file. We can use some of these standard views, top, front, back, whatever we want. Let's say we want a front elevation. So I'm going to choose the front elevation option. We can set a scale. Let's make that 1/4 inch equals a foot scale. Click the OK button, and there we go. We now have a 2D flat representation of a front elevation of that 3D model, and it is linked with that model. So we have lines, splines, and arcs here, all in this 2D world. Now, just to show that this is linked with the 3D model, let's make some changes to that model and see what happens in our layout space. So we go back to our FMZ file, which is our 3D model, and let's change something on here. Let's say we want to add some additional space to the second story in this room over here. So let's make a quick modifications to that. I'll go to a front view, and using the pick tool, I'll go to wireframe for just a second and window pick all the points that are in that part of our model. Now, how far do I want to move these? Well, I'll tell you what, let's measure this and see what distance it is between the mullions here. And you can see if I click from here to here, it looks like it's about 14 foot and 2 inches between those. So let's try that. Let's do a move. And I'm just moving all those points, drag it over, type in 14 foot 2 inches. And there, all those points move 14 feet and 2 inches to the left. And you can see everything moves, all the points move, and all the geometry reconstructs to make that change to that model. Pretty easy, huh? All right, so let's zoom and look at this. That looks pretty good, except inside the curtain wall here, we've stretched all the glass panes and the mullions that are in there. So let's make another quick adjustment to that. So I'll delete those mullions, which were stretched from moving those points around. So let's get rid of those. And we'll just copy these mullions over here to sort of fill in that area to finish off that extended curtain wall. So I will select all of those, hold the shift key to deselect this one on the left, and then using the move tool I can do a repeat copy. So I'll snap to the endpoint here, snap to the endpoint there, and there's our distance, and then every time I click it's going to repeat that copy operation. So there, we filled it in with our changes, and let's save our project file now. So let's do a file save. So we're saving the 3D model, which is the FMZ file. Do a file save, and let's go back to our 2D layout and see what happens. So let's go to our layout file, and there we go. As soon as we bring that file back, it flags it and says, hey, that 3D model has changed. And so if you click the OK button, it'll automatically update the file for you. And you can see that all the links will be listed here. We just have one frame, so there's one link. We can turn that sync option off if you don't want this to update with our changes, but we do want it to update, so we'll leave the check mark there. And then when we click the OK button, you can see that the content, the frame content, will automatically update as that 3D model changes. All right, so that's one way to add content into our sheets of paper here. We can also add graphic image data. If you look at the content tools, you'll see that there's also a place image tool. So we have all sorts of rendered images that Tony did, both in the Render Zone plugin and in the Maxwell Render plugin. And let's see if we can find those. I'll just say load. Any pixel image format will work. So here's some images that he rendered. Open those up, and there, we can place them right in the scene. Now they're pretty small. We can give it any size. Just go to tool options over here on the right. Let's give it the size that we want, and we can place that graphical data inside of our layout space. Pretty easy. All right. You can add additional sheets of paper to our layout. Look in the lower right-hand corner. There's a Sheets palette. Let's expand that. There's one sheet of paper. Click the green plus button, and we add another sheet of paper. And we zoom out a little bit. You can see now there's two sheets. Okay, let's click on sheet 2 and zoom into that one. Let's do a series of elevation views now. Now, to sort of really speed up the layout process, there's a multi-frame tool, which allows us to lay out multiple frames simultaneously. So I will define one single boundary, and inside that boundary, I can lay out multiple frames. So we can choose the layout options here, 2x2, 1x3, 3x3, as many as we want. Now, let's choose what we want in each of those frames. We'll have a front elevation in this one. Click on this one, we'll make that the back elevation, and we'll leave this as right and left. And for the scale, we can set each of the scales separately for each of those, or just apply it one scale for all of those. Once that's set, click the OK button, and off it goes. It'll actually generate multiple frames for you, so that'll help to really speed up that layout process. Now, looking at these elevations, I see we still have our changes in there. So I'm going to go back and change that model back to the way he had it. So let's go ahead and update that. Let's go back to our 3D model. And I'm going to undo the changes that I made to his model. Let's go back, undo a few steps. There we go. So now we're back to the original model that was there. And I'll resave the file. And let's go back to our layout space. And we'll see that that should automatically update for us. Once again, as we go back into that project file, it then recognizes that there is a change to that 3D model, and it'll then prompt us to accept those changes if we want. So click OK, and you'll see once again we'll automatically sync our 2D layout with our 3D model. So now all of our frames are set back to the original model. There we go. All right. Next, let's create some floor plans. All sorts of different ways that we can do floor plans and cross sections of our 3D model. Let's add an additional sheet. Click the green plus button. Here's our third sheet of paper. I'm going to use the frame tool. I'm going to make one large frame that takes up this whole sheet of paper. We'll use that for our first floor plan. And we'll use the same model. Now, I should mention that you can link different 3D models inside your layout space, but we're just going to use the same model here. Let's do the floor plan option. So instead of a view, front, right, back, use the floor plan option and give it an elevation. Let's give it 5 feet. Okay, let's give it a larger scale. Instead of a 1/4 inch scale, let's make that 1/2 inch equals a foot. Click the OK button, and there's our first floor plan. Now, notice I didn't have to do anything in the 3D model. I can just tell it where I want to cut the cross section, and it'll automatically generate a 2D flat layout first floor plan, which consists of a series of flat 2D lines, splines, and arcs. Now, also notice that hatching and line styles are automatically carried over from the 3D model. So you can see the cross section automatically created those hatch patterns for me. That's a real time saver. And all the line style information that I added in the 3D model is also incorporated in these layout frames. I'll talk more about this hatching stuff in just a little bit. Before we do that though, let's create the second story floor plan. So I'll click the green plus button, add another sheet of paper, and let's do another frame. Let's pretty much use the same process. Make a frame, choose the model, choose the floor plan option. Let's choose 16 feet, and let's give it a scale of 1/2 inch equals a foot. Alright, click OK, and now we should have our second story floor plan. That quick and easy, huh? Alright, now I should mention there are other ways of creating floor plans and cross sections besides the floor plan option. There's also an option that you can actually use the clipping planes that you define in your 3D model. Those are the non-destructive dynamic planes in your 3D model, and you can use those as the section plane for your layout. So let's see how that works. What I'll do is let's go back to our 3D model, and I'm going to create some clipping planes through our model. So here's the clipping planes palette right here. Click the green plus button, and there we have a non-destructive dynamic plane that we can visually cut through our model. Now it's not really creating a true section cut, it's just a visualization tool that allows us to view our model through that plane. And I can move that anywhere that I want. Okay, I can turn that one off. I can create as many as I want, so let's add another one. And I'm going to create a clipping plane that's rotated and moved so it's off at the angle of the side of the building over here. Move that right about there. There we go. Alright, you can have multiple planes turned on at the same time. Now at this point it's sort of a modeling tool at this point. It's a visualization tool that lets us look inside of our building, and if we want we can actually work in this mode. So you can see with those planes turned on, I can still go in and use the modeling tools and work inside of that clipped model. Now I'm going to take the second one here. I'm going to pull it out just a little bit further. Because let's say I'm going to use this in my 2D layout mode, and let's say I want my 2D layout cross section to be right about there. There we go, right there. Alright. So now what I'm going to do is turn these off, and it's going to help if I name these. You don't have to name them, but I like to name them so I can keep track of all these planes I have in here. And I'm going to call this section A, and I'm going to call this clipping plane section B. Alright, there we go. So now let's go back to our layout. And what I'm going to do is use these planes in this layout space. Let's go back to sheet number 1. And if we want to modify any of the parameters inside of that frame, we can just simply use the pick tool, right click on the yellow frame boundary, and I can choose the parameters option. And that lets me adjust any of the parameters. I can change the view, the scale, turn layers on and off, whatever I want. I'm going to make one change. I'm going to select the clipping planes tab, and you can see the clipping planes from that 3D model are listed under the clipping planes tab. So let's turn on section A, click OK, and that will automatically update and regenerate that frame with that clipping plane turned on. So there is our section A cross section that is defined from the clipping planes that were defined in the 3D model itself. All right. Now another variation of that would be to create the frame, something like that, and then instead of choosing a view, I'm going to choose the section option. What the section option does is I select a clipping plane that's in the model, and my view will automatically be perpendicular to that clipping plane. So I click OK, and I can see I didn't have to define whether I'm looking at the front, the right side. All I have to do is pick that clipping plane, and it automatically aligns the view in that frame with the perpendicular direction to that clipping plane. Alright, so that's a nice and fast, easy way to make a section B cross section there. Now that's a lot of different ways of adding content to our layout sheets. Now I should mention this real briefly here. If I go to File, Import, if you have information from other programs, you can import, use the Add to Project option, and notice we support all these different industry standard 3D formats here. So you can import stuff from a DWG file, AutoCAD file, DXF, and you can bring that right into the layout mode here. Okay. Now I probably should mention this too. This is just a little side note here. If you export to any of these formats, I can export to an AutoCAD, DWG, or DXF file, and what you see here will all export out as lines, splines, arcs, the same way that you see it here into that other file. So you can take this into other programs also. So you can bring in stuff from other programs and also send this to other programs. That's about it for being able to add content. There's other things I can show here, but let's move on. What I'd like to do is now look at ways that we can adjust the content that is there. We already briefly looked at that. When we looked at sheet number 1, you saw that we can right-click on a frame and we choose the parameters option. We can change the different parameters of that view. So let's expand on that a little bit. Let's go to sheet number 4. And let's say I want to create some kind of exploded detail of one of the rooms here. Maybe I want to annotate some special details and have a blown up scale of some part or some section of this floor plan that we have. One technique that I like to use is I'll create a frame, and I can create the frame anywhere. It doesn't have to be inside of the actual sheets of paper that you see there. So in that frame, I'm going to do a floor plan at 16 feet, so it'll be the same floor plan for the second story, but I'm going to give it a really large scale, so we're really zoomed into that part of the model. So let's go at 1 inch equals a foot. Okay, click OK, and there, we'll get that same second story floor plan, but at a much larger scale. Now let's look at what we can do inside of these frames. We can move the content that is inside the frames. Now I have some layers that are locked here. Let's unlock that. So the move with the self option, and I can drag that frame contents. Let's move that over here. And there we go. So now of course you can see only the part of the model that's inside of that frame boundary. We can also adjust the size of that frame. So if I have the pick tool active, I can right click on the frame, show controls, and that gives us these control handles that let us adjust the size of the frame itself. So I can also snap it right to the entities that are inside of that frame. So let's snap it to the sides of the wall here. So I'm going to shrink the frame down so it matches the outside boundary of just that one room, which is shown at a larger scale, which is at 1 inch equals a foot. Alright, so when I'm done changing the size of the frame, I can right click on it again and turn the show controls off. I can also move the frame itself. So if I use move and don't click on the frame contents, click on the yellow frame, now I'm moving just the frame. So I can drag that onto any page or any sheet of paper and place that wherever I want inside of my layout space. And there, now we have an exploded view of that room at a much larger scale. Now a couple other things I want to mention about how you can change and adjust the frame parameters is this. If I were to right click on that, choose a parameters option, a very important thing is not only can you change the view and the scale and things like that, but also you can change layers. So you can go through and look at the layers that are in that 3D model, turn on or off the layer so you see just the content that you want inside of that frame. Okay. Now something else we can do is break that link with the actual model by simply right clicking on that frame contents. You see it all highlights as a single group. If I right click on that, I can choose the ungroup option. That will break the link with the 3D model. So if the 3D model changes, your entities will not change here, and you end up with really just a bunch of lines, splines, and arcs that sort of represent that current state of that frame. I probably should mention this too as a side note. If you go to the File pull down, go into the Project Info, and you can see there, if you look at the Linked Files tab, you can see all of the frame information and the files that are associated, and you can link or unlink those here also. So there's a couple different ways that you can actually control whether you're staying in sync with that 3D model for each of those views or each of the frames. Alright, making some progress here. So there's all sorts of different ways that we can adjust that frame content. The next area I'd like to talk about is let's annotate the project. We've seen how you can add content. We see how you can adjust the content that's there. Now let's add some dimensions and hatch patterns and text and things like that. So all sorts of dimensioning tools in the layout mode. What I'm going to do is zoom into sheet number 2, and let's add a few dimensions maybe to this front elevation view. Alright, when I select the linear dimension tool, I can actually snap to specific locations on that front elevation view. And if I snap to the proper positions, it will link it back as an associative dimension to that model, so that if the model changes, not only will the frame contents change, but also the associative dimension information will change also. Alright, let's do some multiple dimensions. We'll do an ordinate dimension. We can snap to the bottom ground plane here, snap to that part, snap to that part. And then if I drag that out, we can quickly add a series of elevation dimensions to that. Now here's another neat thing. If I were to add a radial dimension to that, you can see that when I move it over any arcs that are in that front plan elevation, it's a true arc. And so when you bring in these elevational views or any frame contents, it'll actually keep it as splines and arcs that you can actually add radius or dimension values to that. Okay. Now I should mention, this is one of the new things that's in 7.3. And I'll show you, if you right click on that frame, show the parameters option, you can see that there's the object type. This is, like I said, a new feature that's in 7.3, so if you're using previous versions of 7, you won't see these options there. So make sure you update to version 7.3. And with that, you can see that you can actually create the graphic entities that are inside the frame as just a bunch of lines. That's how it was with previous versions. But now we have new options, which is polylines, meaning it'll make a series of connected lines, or you can choose the line, splines, and arcs option, which will actually generate lines. Curved sections will be spline curves, and arc and circle information will come in as true arcs that you can actually dimension from the arc information that is there. Now that is the default setting, so if you don't change anything, it'll automatically come in as lines, splines, and arcs. All right. Okay, let's talk briefly about being able to adjust your dimension styles. So if I were to select that dimension, you can see if I look at the parameters tab over here in the upper right hand corner, you can see that it's automatically set to the default style. If you want to edit that, choose the edit styles. And then inside of here, the default style can't be changed. That's locked. So you always have that there. If you want to adjust anything, you have to create your own styles. Click on the green plus button. Let's create a new style. Let's call it Matt's Dim Style 1. Click a blank area. There you go. Now we can adjust anything here. Change the arrow, the type of arrow, the size, the display accuracy. We can change that to maybe an 1/8 inch. Change your text font, whatever you want. Click OK, and you can see that that dimension will now update to the new personal style that you created yourself. If you want to change other dimensions in the project to a different style, just simply select that dimension. And if you look at the style list here, it'll list all the styles that are currently in that project. So we can change that to that style that I just created. Now you can load styles from other projects. Let's see where that's at. If I go to the Edit Styles option, you can see that you can load the dimension styles from some other Formsy file. So you have some standard ones that you use every time. You can always load those in and set those. You can even set those up in a template file too if you want to use those all the time for each of your projects. All right, now I should mention also these dimensions don't have to be associated to object. For example, if I move up here to this graphical image that I placed in this layout, I can add a linear dimension. I'll just click right here, and I'll click right there. And I'm not clicking to any 3D geometry. I'm just clicking on my piece of paper that's on top of that image there. So I can place those anywhere. It's not associated to anything. It's just a plain dimension that's laying on that sheet of paper. So of course, notice that I'm getting the paper space size. Now of course, when you associate a dimension to the frame entities, then it's looking at the true size of the model. So it'll give you the true model space size. If you're just clicking them anywhere, then it's give you just the actual paper space size, because it doesn't have any model for it to link to. So what we can do is click on that dimension, and if you look up here in the parameters, we can create some custom text here. The less than a greater sign means it'll use the actual dimension that's there. I can get rid of that and just type in 40 feet. 0 inches. There we go. All right, so I can automatically update it that way. Let's add a leader. Let's say we want to spec out the type of glass that's going to be used for this project. So let's type in insulated double panel glass. Let's try that for now. We can always change this later on. There you go. And I think you get the idea of how easy it is to quickly annotate your model with both associative and non-associative type of dimensions. I should mention too that when you're in this layout mode, of course, there's line styles, line weights. We can add those to the line entities that are there. There's a hatch tool to add hatching information, but a real time saver is, like I mentioned earlier, you look at that cross section, the hatching information and line styles are automatically brought in from the 3D model. So if you add any of that in the 3D model, you don't have to redo it here in the layout space. So let's talk a little bit about how we can do that for ourselves on our own projects. Well, let's go back to our 3D model. All right. And let's look at that section B plane that I created earlier. So I turn that on, and you can see that when I move that dynamic clipping plane, that cross section is automatically generating that hatch pattern. And how is it doing that? Well, I'll show you. Let's turn the section B off. If I were to pick any object, let's pick this object, which is that serpentine flowing floor ceiling shape there. And look in the tool options over here on the right. I'm going to click on the Attributes tab. You can see one of the attributes for the object is the cross-section attributes. And we can control how the cross-sections for that object are created by changing these different parameters here. And one of them is the hatch pattern. Normally this is off. So if you want to have a cross-section hatch pattern, you need to turn this on, and then you can drag and drop any hatch pattern into that box. So here's a hatch pellet, has all sorts of hatch patterns that come with Formz, and you can load your own hatch patterns. We support the industry standard .pat files, so if you need to load any custom libraries that you have, you can load any .pat file. And you can download those from the internet. They're all industry standard files. See one that you like, just drag and drop it into here, and it'll take on the cross-section attributes for that. Now, you can also add hatch patterns to objects or faces of objects in the 3D modeling window, and those will also carry over into the 2D layout space. So let's try that. Let's just grab one of these hatch patterns here. I'll drag and drop it onto this wall panel. Now if you want to apply it to just a single face, you can hold down the Command key on Mac or Control key on Windows. Then when you drag and drop it, it's going to apply it to just one face of the object. There's hatch tools, which lets you not only place the hatches. If you don't want to use drag and drop, you can use the hatch tool. And there's a hatch edit tool also. If I click on that hatched object, you can see we get this little widget that lets us dynamically control the hatch pattern that's on there. So I can move it up, move it down, rotate it, and if you look in tool options over here, you can see there's all sorts of numeric parameters to control the scale and size of that hatch pattern on that object. Now also notice in this suite of tools that we have here, along with the hatch, there's also 3D dimensioning tools. We can add 3D dimensions in our model to annotate it in 3D, and if we have those dimensions on, when we bring it into layout, we can actually have those dimensions show up in the layout space also. So if we were to spin this around, let's just add a 3D dimension somewhere. How about right here? Snap to the endpoint here, snap to the endpoint there, drag that out just a little bit. There we go. And there's a 3D associative dimension that's attached to that 3D geometry that we can change the model, and that dimensional information will update with it. Okay. Now, if you want to see what this will look like in layout space, we can actually preview it here. We can actually maybe turn the section B plane on. We got our hatch pattern there. We got dimensions, line styles. You can see there's line styles here in the 3D world also. If you want to change those, we can simply do something like this. Go in and just drag the line style that you want. Drag and drop it onto the entity. Now that takes on a different line style. So we changed all this stuff, and if you do a hidden line rendering here, in the display options up here, do a hidden line, we're sort of vectorizing, we're doing a vector rendering of our scene. You can see that all that stuff is represented in a vector rendering also. So we have the cross-section hatch pattern, we have the hatch pattern assigned to objects, we have the 3D dimensions and line styles that all show up in your hidden line process. You can take the image as is here and save it, or we can actually use this information in our layout space. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go back to our layout space. And tell you what, let's create one more view and see how all that stuff looks when we bring it into the layout world here. Let's do a frame. And I'm going to create a frame right here. And let's try a 3D view. Let's do this home view here that I saved. And instead of a scale, let's just tell it to fit. We can turn the clipping plane section B on. We can make sure it's lines, splines, and arcs. And also notice if I click this options button, you can see that we do have additional options to control how that's going to be brought in. So we can turn the show line styles on or off. If you don't want to bring in the line styles and line weights from the 3D, we can turn that off. Okay. Now here's another option we can change too. What if you have transparent objects? The hidden line process by default will show the glass panels as a solid opaque surface, so you won't be able to see behind those. If you want to see through the glass, you can actually turn on the show transparent objects as wireframe, and then when we process that view, we click OK. We're going to generate a 3D view with the hatch patterns and dimensions and line styles and transparent objects and all sorts of good stuff that you can play with to be able to get just the exact view that you want for that model. And there it is. There's a nice little cross-section view. Now this is a 2D flat representation that consists of a series of lines, splines, and arcs. And that's how easy it is to quickly create a 2D layout from your 3D models in FormZ. Some other additional examples of some of the layout drawing documents that were generated in FormZ for the rest of this project. Here's a first floor plan. Here's a second floor plan. Here's all the elevation views with dimensions and all sorts of text and other information in there. And here's sort of a layout sheet that was done with a collage of both cross sections, imported some image maps, and just arrange that any way that you want. And this concludes the FormZ Layout webinar.